Well, hello and welcome to AASR Live. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Really happy to have you here with us today. You might notice that I am in a different place than usual, which happens from time to time as we schedule events, and then sometimes I'm traveling or doing something else. Today is one of those days. I have been in Pennsylvania this morning and had a great opportunity to present to some amazing parents and educators and advocates talking about how many times children are misunderstood in the name of behavior. Really great opportunity. Of course, we are here today for our usual live event. If you're familiar with the Alliance, of course, we are here to raise awareness and promote change. We want to really influence a change in policy, a change in practice, around things that are often happening to individuals, very often in the name of behavior. When it comes to schools, it's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, and in some settings, it's different things. But really what we want to do is raise awareness and promote change. We want to ultimately, hopefully, have a hand in being part of the work to really create a safer world, a better world, and one that, we don't have the kinds of experiences that so many of us had either as parents or as children or adults. So at any rate, really excited to have you here today. And I tell you every week, every other week, I guess it is, how excited I am about the guests we have. And today, of course, is no exception. I'm really excited to have with us today Jordyn Zimmerman, joining us really for a special interview and discussion. Jordyn is going to share about her lived experiences as a non-speaking autistic student and now an adult who was denied effective communication and inclusive education, and unfortunately also experienced restraint and seclusion. And we'll tell you more about Jordyn here in a moment, but I do want to let you know that today's session is being recorded, as always. So we record these events and they are available on right now live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You are also able to go back in time and watch them on those same platforms. We also make it available as an audio podcast, and you can listen to that on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also now working to make the transcripts available and trying to do more to make this show as accessible as we can. So with that said, it is time for me to get to the exciting part. But before I do, I just want to encourage you, if you're already online watching us live, let me know in the chat, or let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always great to see, who people are, where they're coming to us from. And I often see a lot of familiar faces. So let us know who you are and where you are from in the chat. And with that, let me get to really why you're here, which is going to be to meet our guests. So as I mentioned, we have today with us Jordyn Zimmerman. Jordyn earned her bachelor's degree in education policy from Ohio University and her master's of education at Boston College. As a non-speaking autistic student, was denied access to effective augmented communication until she was 18. Jordyn had personally experienced really challenging situations in the educational system, which were featured in a documentary in 2021. I shared this recently on our social media, but there's a fantastic documentary called "This Is Not About Me," which really talks about the struggles and the successes that Jordyn has had. Jordyn is doing some really amazing things and currently serves on the board of CommunicationFIRST, also works with the Nora Project, and is a current presidential appointee. So Jordyn, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am beyond excited to have you here and part of the show.
Thanks for having me, Guy.
And I will mention, Jordyn, I had sent Jordyn ahead of time some of the questions for the interview. Unfortunately, not really as far ahead of time as I had planned, and I apologize to Jordyn. So Jordyn has gone through and taken time to kind of get the responses typed out in her AAC for some of the questions, but at other times we'll need time to enter her response or answer. And as Jordyn let me know two things. One, she let me know if for some reason the audio is a problem for anybody. or begins to not sound the way it should, she asked me to let her know. But also, when Jordyn's looking down, she's probably working on a response. Jordyn's also agreed to take some questions from our live audience, and we'll get to some of that. Of course, you guys all know how this works. I have a lot of questions first, and I don't mean to monopolize the questions, but it gives us a place to start. So before we get started with the questions, I'll just mention to you again, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And Jordyn, I'll share with you a couple of people who have already introduced themselves. We have Kyla from Orlando, Florida. We have Michelle, who is in Nebraska. We have Acorns with Whiskers. I like that. Acorns with Whiskers. Andy from St. Paul, Minnesota. We have Diane here as well. We have Angie, and I happen to know Angie's in Maryland, or maybe in Maryland. We have Lisa. We have a number of people that are joining us. I've got somebody here from St. Lucie County, Florida, 22-year-old son with Down syndrome who was restrained, oh gosh, from the time I was made aware in 2010 and 2011. We also have here with us Cass Bennett from Washington State. I'm here because Jordyn is the reason we started High Tech AAC and then our two-year-old a year ago, and it's changed our whole lives. This is not about me. It's such an amazing resource. I love to connect with other parents of young AAC users. So before we've even gotten started here, Jordyn, we already know that you are doing things to really make a positive change for autistic individuals, for families, for so many others. But it's also been a tough journey, and we're going to talk a bit about that journey today. And I will let people know that part of this is hard. Jordyn had some difficult experiences, and some of this may be hard to hear. But we want to talk about we want to talk a little bit about this. So with all that said, again, I'm sure we'll have more people introduce themselves. Jordyn, I'm going to go ahead and start sending some questions to you, and we'll start the conversation. So I want to start out here. When you started school as a child, my understanding is you were really eager to learn. But early on, one of the things that happened to you is the same thing that happens to many kids. You were segregated from other children. What do you remember about the early years of school, kind of going from somebody that was really eager to suddenly being separated from other children?
Thanks for that question. I remember when I started school, I had an aide from day one. I know this because it's memorable for me, but I also think it's important in terms of how it all played out. That person, at no fault of their own, didn't facilitate my inclusion and belonging, didn't ensure I had access to effective communication, and didn't advocate for challenging instruction. They were there to ensure my safety and compliance, however that was all defined in the moment. It's interesting to think back on that now, and how it could have been different, and how it could be different for so many students. I often hear about this still being a common scenario, and big emphasis on safety remains the same. However, communication is such a big part of safety, so it's a bit of a twisted idea.
Thanks for that answer. And you're absolutely right. I can tell you, kind of having a community here of parents and self-advocates and educators and others. There are many things that are done to people in the name of safety, in the name of behavior. And of course, when you're not able to feel safe, when you're not able to connect and communicate, and if all of it is kind of focused on, managing, ensuring compliance, it's the wrong goal. And unfortunately, that often leads to things like you experience, like segregation. So, things started off in a difficult place for you. And of course, as you continued to, move into middle school, things were difficult. People often saw you for your behavior and not the person that you were. And, as you mentioned, this sadly still happens for many children today. So, do you have thoughts on and I'm sure that you do, on, how we make that shift and get people to look beyond behavior. And I'm really, your answer to the last question was very gracious in terms of, not assigning blame or fault, but saying, that we need to do better. And, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that kind of that middle school experience, and then what we can do to help people to look beyond behavior.
I think there's a couple things that happened in middle school. First, as gross as it may seem, I was no longer an enchanting little kid. And secondly, I wasn't easy to physically move around anymore. Those are two things that are important for people to think about and reflect on, in terms of how my experience got worse in middle school. But for how we get people to think beyond behavior, we have to reframe how we think about behavior, how we think about supports and inclusion, and we value, with that last part being really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We spend a lot of time here at the Alliance kind of talking about the importance of, reframing, and the importance of understanding some of the things that we know today that maybe we haven't always known. But I am often taken to a quote by Dr. Stuart Shanker. And Dr. Stuart Shanker wrote some great books, one of which was called Self-Reg. And Dr. Shanker has this quote that I love, which is that if you see a child differently, you see a different child. Often it's the way the adult sees a person or sees a child. And as you experience, kids are sometimes even dehumanized, and under, I remember from watching the film, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I remember, you talking about the things that you were being tasked to do. And of course you have all these ideas and thoughts that you're unable to communicate, and how difficult and demeaning and that experience is. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. And I agree with you that we really do need to not only look at things differently and change our lens, but I think even beyond that, we've learned a lot about the brain and the way the brain works. And we've learned a lot about, what trauma looks like. And I would imagine that your schooling was traumatic, and have often kind of imagined that, if you're not speaking in a world that doesn't understand you, I can imagine that's very difficult. And at times just incredibly frustrating. Is that, and I know I'm a little off script here, but is that a feeling that you had when you would just had things to communicate and had things to say, but were unable to do it without the ability to use your voice?
So there's two parts to that. I always say that school was the cause of so much trauma, but also ultimately, the cure to so much trauma, because I needed to be there and I needed people to understand my right to be there. With the communication, or the lack of a reliable method of communication, any time without communication is traumatic, especially when it's layered by another traumatizing experience.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I can imagine how challenging that must have been, and of course, not being able to be sometimes heard or understood when people were only looking at behavior. There were times that that led to things like, and it's my understanding that you experienced physical restraint and seclusion in schools. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? And again, I realize this is something that is probably a difficult memory, and want to be mindful of that. But can you share a little bit about your experience?
That is right. My experiences have really included everything from padded seclusion rooms, to being held down, or restrained with the use of handcuffs. There were days where I was physically restrained 10 or 20 times within one day, and would have bruises all over my body a few days later.
And Jordyn, I'm really sorry that that was something something that was done to you and something that you experienced. I started the Alliance because I have a son who's neurodivergent, who was restrained and secluded, and I know how traumatic it was for my son. Since starting the Alliance, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of parents and families and individuals, and these things are really difficult and traumatic. How do you think, what looking back, what were some of the reasons why, you ended up being restrained or secluded at school?
I'm sure this question could be answered in many different ways, such as my safety or well-being. But I think although many of the reasons center on my worth, or lack thereof, comparative to the worth of other students.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course that's what we often hear, is the idea around safety. But I agree with you. And you look at the data. The data is really overwhelming. That 80% of restraints nationally are kids with disabilities. 77% of seclusions. You look at autistic individuals, and they often make up half of those numbers. And it really is. I mean, to me, I look at those numbers and I think this is a sign that we're failing people. This is a sign that we're not appropriately meeting people's needs. But even today, many years later, past your experience, past my son's experience, these things continue to happen. How do you think that the experience that you had with restraint and seclusion, how do you think that impacted you?
In the moment, it was always really traumatic. Some people think that restraint will help a student become re-regulated, and that's just not the case. Imagine being forcefully held down against your will when you are at your most dysregulated state. That's just not how we help other humans. But in terms of how it's impacted me, it's affected every part of my life, especially because I didn't have the reliable communication to tell people that this was happening in the moment. So I had this huge buildup of trauma, not only from not being able to share, but from how I was being treated by people who were supposed to be supporting my needs.
Yeah, and that's so important. People that are there to support your needs, but ultimately people that you should feel safe around. And once you go hands on with anyone, once you restrain or seclude someone, that person that this was done to is not going to feel safe. And safety is so critical to everything else. I mean, safety is critical to learning. We can't learn. Our prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, goes offline, if we don't feel safe. And, so many of these things that are done to people really lead to feeling unsafe and not being able to learn. And obviously you're in school there to learn. And of course, we know from the data that autistic individuals are far more likely to be restrained and secluded in schools. We often see non-speaking individuals more likely to be restrained and secluded in schools. And of course, you had this experience, but you've also now have experience working with organizations. You have degrees in education. So I'm interested in your ideas or your thoughts on how do we stop these things? I mean, at the Alliance, we're of course taking an approach to try to influence legislative changes and laws and policies. We're trying to get people aware of the things they should be doing instead. But give me your take, both as somebody that's had this experience, but also as somebody that has this knowledge from your college and your background. What do you think we can do to lead to a change here? And I just want to remind people, feel free to jump in the chat and tell us who you are and where you're from. I see a number of comments here. Good to see some familiar faces. Always great to have you here.
These are some million-dollar questions. But so often, when students who cannot rely on speech to communicate begin school, they are placed on a path of segregation and limited education. When a student is 4 years old, a team is making decisions to segregate that student, which forever impact the trajectory of their life. And there is also a belief that students who cannot rely on speech to communicate have an intellectual disability, and while nothing is wrong with having an intellectual disability, we shouldn't make these automatic assumptions based on biases or misguided information. So to improve school, we need to interrogate the system and how it works. We can't keep saying yes to things we know are causing harm.
I agree with you 1,000%. That's a fantastic answer. I saw a post on Facebook from a colleague today, and it was talking about words for resilience. And one of the things that popped in my mind was, this isn't just about resilience, it's about not doing harm, right? Rather than harming and then figuring out how to help people be resilient, what if we can do more to stop harm upstream and to change systems? I want to take a moment, Jordyn. We've got some great things happening here in the chat. So I want to take a moment and address a couple of things here. First, I have from Acorns with Whiskers, who I mentioned before, and I love the name and I love the picture there. Fellow survivor of seclusion and restraint here. Many thanks to Jordyn for sharing about your experiences. I'm prepping to share publicly my own experiences too. I'll just say to you that I'm really sorry to hear about your experience. These are things that we're working really hard to stop, because these things that were done to you, these things that were done to Jordyn, these things that were done to my son, shouldn't have happened in the first place and shouldn't continue to happen. And I'll also let you know at some point, if you want to share your story, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you and help in that process if we can. I have a comment here from Cass Bennett. Cass said, the single biggest effect high-tech AAC had on our lives is the dramatic increase in our 3-year-old's emotional regulation. Because she feels safer knowing she can be understood, I wish robust AAC were made available ASAP to toddlers. We started at age 2. And I would say that you're even fortunate, because we, and Jordyn, I'm curious what you think about this, but, I've certainly heard a lot of stories about schools, professionals that want to withhold AAC because they feel somehow that if they bring a child to AAC, that it will inhibit speech. And for years, sometimes children are on a path when they're not getting help and not having a voice. And I know this is not one of our questions, but do you have any thoughts on that? And Michelle, that's an important point here. Communication absolutely is a right.
Yeah, it's just not true. There are no prerequisites to AAC, and there are no reasons to wait for a quote-unquote good time. The best time to start is now.
Yeah, that's a great answer. We had interviewed at one point Mike Hipple, and Mike is an AAC user in Wisconsin who's part of an organization there. And Mike was kind of talking about, how in his view, getting people AAC, getting people a voice, when people focus on behavior, when you're providing people with ability and a voice, and I'm paraphrasing, so I may not get Mike's words exactly right here, but, essentially that's a way to help reduce behaviors. When people have a voice, people have an ability to speak and share their thoughts and feelings. So that's a great point. So I want to move forward into high school. And I remember in watching the film, you describing being in high school and being, kind of tasked these simple tasks, like stacking quarters and earning candy for these tasks. And of course, I'm not a big proponent for a lot of the kind of reward and consequence driven programs, but the behavioral driven approaches are pretty common in school. And you kind of said these things weren't helping you, and I don't think they really help a lot of kids today. How do we shift people away from these compliance based approaches that are really failing a lot of our kids? Brian, I'll thank you for your point. Um, Oops. Okay, hold on. Let me. That you're right. We're often very reactive instead of proactive.
Yes, that was sometimes separate, but also part of the restraint and seclusion cycle. Myself, and students who are still in the system, are often restrained or secluded, and then given these super basic tasks to test our compliance. And often, it causes more escalation and mistrust, and perpetuates the trauma we experience.
Absolutely. And I can tell you from experience of talking to a lot of individuals, a lot of families, very often even the positive rewards are often the thing that's a catalyst for um, kids that are having a difficult time. It's not a matter of just getting somebody to follow your orders. It's a matter of helping people develop skills, ability, have the voice to express themselves. What a fantastic answer. So, we're in high school, and you mentioned that it wasn't until you were quite a bit older that you began to get a voice. And let's talk about that. When did things, until you were 18, you didn't have access to effective communication. So when did things change for you? Can you tell us a little bit about that in a positive way?
After I gained access to effective and reliable communication through iPad, things slowly started to change for me. My mom found a public school serving autistic students within a larger district, and that helped me in the moment, as I was able to become more proficient on my iPad. iPad was only one tool though, and it didn't immediately fix everything. For those of us who are non-speaking, I think there's misunderstandings or misconceptions about our actions, and therefore, how we are then perceived. Just as an example, I would crash my body into walls, or hit my head repeatedly, all to soothe my need for pressure, but it wasn't understood as that. However, now I could more readily communicate that I had this need for deep pressure, and I had a team of people who would squeeze my head in a way that provided the same input, so that quote-unquote behavior was no longer viewed in the same way. Still, my local public school was pretty adamant in saying they couldn't support my needs, but after spending a year at this new school within a new district, they became committed to supporting me. So I transitioned to a public high school an hour away, which I rode to each day. And to be clear, it wasn't easy by any means. When I started at this high school, I had never been meaningfully included in challenging academic classes, so this was the first time. I had a lot of moments of frustration and dysregulation where I would run out of the building, grab at people, or express frustration in other ways. But it was also during those moments where I had a team to support me, who were committed to my success as a student, and as a human. And as I was intentionally provided supports, and included within the school community, things shifted. However, I also want to say that students should not have to have access to effective communication before being included, or before recognizing that restraint and seclusion is not okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mean, what a, amazing, change began to happen when you began to get effective communication, the right kind of support. And of course, you went on eventually to college. Um, so after not being included in a meaningful way, after not having a voice, you were able to make tremendous progress and then move on to college. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience in college and because I'm sure the challenges weren't over at that point. What were some of the challenges and what helped you to be successful in college?
College was both beautiful and beautifully challenging. I had the opportunity to live in the residence hall, start an inclusive cheerleading team, and enjoy all the various parts of college life. I think I had ice cream every day my first year, which was pretty marvelous. But in addition to autism, I have epilepsy, and there were some moments where my seizures were more frequent. One thing that became super apparent was how people don't know how to interact with someone who needs support on a college campus. There were times when I would have a seizure, and I would come to, and everyone would be trying to get me to communicate, but I needed some time. I would become dysregulated, and the go-to was to restrain me. I think this was also due, in part, to a lot of people trying to work together, and the messages not always getting relayed. However, I was really fortunate that Disability Rights Ohio was involved and willing to advocate for my right to effective communication, my right to be free from restraint and seclusion, especially when I was postdoctoral, and my right to accommodations across the college campus.
Wow. Wow. I remember when I had shared with you these questions, you marking this question saying it's really important. I think sometimes people make the assumption that, okay, well, you've got out of school and you're going on to college and everything's just fine now, right? The world's going to be fine and the world's going to be better, but there continue to be challenges. I'm really excited to hear that Disability Rights Ohio work to work with you. Am I correct? Did you do an internship at one point with NDRN, the National Disability Rights Network? For some reason, I had that in my head that somebody had shared that with me.
Yes.
Okay, which of course NDRN is kind of the parent to all these what they're called PNAs, or protection and advocacy organizations across the country. And it may be disability rights blank. It may have a different name, but these organizations really provide a lot of help and support for individuals with disabilities, and are often involved in efforts around restraint and seclusion. I would work with Disability Rights Maryland here in the state of Maryland, and currently I'm working with some folks from Disability Rights Washington and Washington State. So great organization. I really appreciate your answer there, but I want to share with you a couple of things. Occasionally, as you've been putting answers in, I've shared a couple of the comments here on the screen. And then I realized that these are things I need to share with you, Jordyn. People that are just responding and saying, this is amazing. And I agree. And Jennifer, I might even tweak that a little bit and just say, Jordyn, you're amazing. Kind of the insights that you're sharing with us are really valuable. And, and I will say, and I think there's a comment later that gets to, the message that you bring forward and the way that you're doing it, provides probably a lot of hope for families. And, I think we're always hoping, and at least, this is kind of how I frame things, that, our experiences, while sometimes really difficult and unpleasant, if somebody can benefit from that in some way, it's a good thing. And I think that your story is definitely helping. Nicole, who I believe is in New Jersey, said this interview is invaluable to our world. Thank you for doing this. Chantel, who is a volunteer of the Alliance in Canada, said, my daughter has been able to tell us why she's sad for the first time in her life recently because of AAC. Can't even explain to you what that means to me and what that means for her. So I just wanted to share some of these comments. Jennifer said, Jordyn, you're giving so many families and individuals a huge gift, the gift of hope. So many had this taken away from them, starting with a diagnosis. But your story is inspiring and shares why, as caregivers, we won't give up on our kids. So a lot of really positive comments coming in here. And I do want to let people know, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I've got a couple more questions that I want to ask, but we'll try to get to some other questions as well. Michelle said, Jordyn, I'm contemplating helping my son, who is 16, testify about his experience with seclusion and restraint at Fairbury School. What are your opinions about that? Do you think it's too traumatic? So do you have any opinions about somebody testifying about their own experience at 16?
I would ask the person how they feel about it. I think that's always really important.
Yeah, absolutely. As a parent, my son who has had the experience, I now make sure I have his permission to share the experience. And he has, I've made the, offer to him at times if he wanted to get involved or testify. But I think it's really important. I think, even for us to tell our child's story, it's not, part of it may be our story, but I think we should always ask for consent to share a story. I know my son has a couple of times said that he wanted to help with things and has written actually short pieces of testimony, but that's always on his own. That's always his own decision. I think that's really important. I have a couple more questions here, and I could probably go on talking to you for quite some time, but tell me a little bit about the documentary. So in 2021, there was a documentary, This Is Not About Me. And of course, you were featured in that documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about the film and kind of how that came to be?
Yeah, the film chronicles some of my story and experiences, but it is also the story of so many other students. As you recognize and so many others will, my story is quite common, and so it's filmed in a way that allows viewers to reflect, empathize, and come to their own conclusions on the systemic change that needs to occur.
Did you have a lot of people reach out to you after the film? I can imagine that it really resonated with a lot of people. Did you have a lot of people reach out to you?
Yes. Folks who work within the system are constantly reaching out and sharing how they are changing their practices, but also, families reach out to share the impact the film has on young students, which is just so meaningful to me.
Hey, Jordyn, the audio just did that little trick where it is acting funky, so I don't know if it's something that just needs to be unplugged and replugged in.
Yes. Folks who work within the system are constantly reaching out and sharing how they are changing their practices, but also, families reach out to share the impact the film has on young students, which is just so meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And the audio sounds perfect again. I've got a couple more questions, and I know I have to stop asking questions, but there's a lot. I love being able to, kind of hear your experience and really benefit from, your wisdom. I'm going to combine a couple questions here, and I'm going to simplify. But how do we make the world a better place for non-speaking individuals? What can we do to make the world a better place? And I did put a link to the documentary in the chat. Somebody asked about that, so you can find it. I think you can rent it. I think it's about $6 or so to rent the film.
My mom says this in the film, and it's so true. People decide who someone is going to be at a super young age, and that's a problem. We have to stop doing that. We have to provide services and supports to people, and not limit potential with decisions that impact their life trajectory. We don't know who someone is going to become,
Yeah, what a great point. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we've got to stop making our mind up and judging people, because when we do, we close the door. That was a great comment. So we have Cass has actually asked the question, what's kind of next on my list, which is, do you have any advice for parents of non-speaking autistic kids, kids that maybe are having a difficult time?
Presume confidence in your child, ask questions if something doesn't seem right, keep records, and advocate for more. Every student is valuable and every student deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, great answer. So I have two more questions. One is, I understand that you serve as the board chair for Communication First, which is an organization that I think is absolutely amazing. The work that they're doing, we've actually collaborated with Communication First on a couple of things. Can you tell us a little bit more about Communication First and your role within the organization?
Yeah, I'm board chair of Communication First, which is certainly an amazing organization. We are the only national nonprofit dedicated to advancing and protecting the rights of the estimated 5 million children and adults who cannot rely on speech to be heard or understood. Some of the things Communication First works on include ensuring access to robust communication tools, improving self-determination and issues around supported decision-making, and more. So many important things.
Absolutely. A fantastic organization. I just shared the link in the chat as well. Certainly encourage people to check it out. So my final question for you, and then I've got one question. I know we're about over the hour point, so we'll wrap this up here shortly. But my final question for you is, what's next for you, Jordyn? I mean, what are your goals and what are your dreams, today, and where are you hoping to go next? And I ask that under the guise of, I'm a firm believer that life is always evolving. I never expected 4 years ago for me to, leave my job and focus my life on work to make a change for people. So our lives are always unfolding. But what is it? What are your dreams and hopes, Jordyn?
I don't know, but when I know, I'll be sure to tell you.
Fair enough. I don't know that I know either, so maybe it's a tough question, but I know whatever you do, that you will just do amazing things, and have been excited about the work that I've seen you do with other organizations, and the change that you're helping to bring about. So let me ask one or two more questions here from the audience. I saw one or two things I wanted to try to get to here. And here was one which was from Lisa. Lisa said, "What's your advice? What advice would you give to a non-speaker speller who wants to finish general education in high school, get a diploma, and go to college, but most importantly, wants to be an advocate for others trapped in the silent cage?"
I would say, share your story amongst the community to help others. I wish someone would have told me I wasn't alone and that things could get better when supported in the right ways.
Yeah, great point. When we started the Alliance 4 years ago, the initial goal that I had was that people that were going through this, I wanted them to know that they weren't alone and that they could influence change. And I think there's so much power with connection and knowing that you're not alone. One final question, and then we will wrap up here. Chantel asked, "I would love to know which AAC software you use, and what you think about adding phrases for buttons as opposed to just single words. I'm beginning to learn about Gestalt language processing."
I use Proloquo for text. It always depends on the person, but I think access to the alphabet is really important.
Okay, great. So Jordyn, I want to wrap this up, and I've got to tell you, I interview a lot of people over the last 3 years that we've been doing this show, and and I really felt this interview, kind of in my heart and in my soul. You sharing your story, the work that you're doing to really bring about positive change, the voice that you bring to it. I really appreciate all that you're doing. You are an amazing human, and really appreciate all that you're doing to, hopefully make the world a better place for others. And, it's absolutely incredible. And I want to ask those of you that are watching, to put your thanks in the chat. But, Jordyn, I just wanted to give you a huge, thanks for being here and for sharing your story and for doing what you do. I want to give you an opportunity if you have any final words or anything you'd like to share with us as we wind up. But I can assure you that this has been time well spent for those that have been watching or will come back and watch later. So important to hear the voice of lived experience, to hear your experience and story. So I'll let you have the final word if you have anything else you'd like to share.
Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share. I hope we can all continue moving systems forward together.
Absolutely. And I'll have to tell you, and you might be hearing from me again, but as I listened to you, I thought, oh, gee, maybe there's some more opportunities to work together and collaborate. And I'd love to do that. I do want to share with you just some final thoughts here. We had a thank you from Chantel. Bree said, this is incredible, easily my favorite interview. I can't wait to share this with my support group. Thank you both. This is vital for this work that you do. Tracy said, thank you, Jordyn. Let's see, we have another here. Trevs, thank you. Kim says, thank you. Jeannie says, thank you, Jordyn. What an important story you're telling. And Cass said, thank you, Jordyn and Guy. I look up to both of you so much for the work to help the most vulnerable kids, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. And finally, hear from Jeannie. Thank you, Jordyn. What an important story you're telling. And with that, Jordyn, I am going to let you go. I know I kept you a little bit longer than I promised, but thank you so much again. And thank you, everybody that watched us today. Please, the part of the reason we do these is we want you to share them with your friends, your colleagues, people that need to understand. The only way we make progress is by sharing stories and sharing this. So, Jordyn, thank you. I will let you go. We're going to end the broadcast here. And thank you, everybody that watched. I'll see you again in about 2 weeks.